Hello, and welcome to Festival of Place Climate Resilience to this session on transforming homes for future generations. My name is Christine Murray. I'm the director of the Festival of Place and editor-in-chief of The Developer. The purpose of this event is to learn and be inspired. Oh, Simon?
Hello, goodbye.
That's Simon just showing up backstage just to say hello. The purpose of this event is to learn and be inspired by work taking place in creating climate resilient places. Thanks to Civic who are supporting this event, previously known as Civic Engineers. We are grateful to them and our member organizations for supporting this event and everything that we do. And we're also grateful for Simon for running the backstage so brilliantly. It's nice to have him on stage for a change to say hello. We had great sessions yesterday. Three speakers: Jonathan Smales from Human Nature, Civic on the power of soil and how we can take care of that carbon sink and biodiverse life underneath the buildings, and Shannon Baker from Toronto on how they moved a river to protect the city from flooding and create a biodiverse wetland and riverbank. A reminder that all those sessions are recorded and they are available to view after the event. You can use the schedule button to navigate there. We will be taking your questions at the end of this session, so please use the Q&A tab, which is located on the chat window at any time during the event to type those questions in. The Q&A is a great way for you to shape your learning and to ensure you get the full benefit from our speakers. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Catherine Butler, Associate Professor at University of Exeter. Catherine is Associate Professor in Human Geography within the Environment and Sustainability Research Group. Her research examines processes of societal transition required to address environmental challenges and is linked to issues of equity, justice, and well-being. She is the lead for a major AHRC project examining transformation of homes in UK cities. She is chair of the Royal Geographical Society Energy Geographies Research Group, formerly convener of the British Sociological Association of Climate Change Study Group, and associate editor for the journals Environmental Research Letters, Climate Change, Frontiers in Climate, and Geography and Environment. So please give Catherine a warm emoji applause for joining the stage. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, you hear me okay?
I can hear you great, and I really appreciate you being there. Catherine is a little bit under the weather today, so she's braving it for us. So thank you for braving the cold.
Great.
Well, your slides are coming, and I will pass over to you until the Q&A. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Christine. That's great. Okay, yeah, very happy to be here today presenting on behalf of the Transforming Homes project. Yeah, I will give myself a slight disclaimer that I am plague-ridden, the start of term illness that we inevitably all get. So yeah, bear with me a bit if I'm not as quick as normal today. But yeah, I'm going to do my best to give you a bit of insight into what we're doing as part of the Transforming Homes project. I'll talk through a few examples of what we're sort of aiming to do with the research, and then I'm going to turn to talk about some of the challenges that we faced in delivering the project, and I guess delivering on some of the ambitions that we have for this project in terms of sustainable transitions and design. We are 2 years into a 4.5-year project, so this is very much sort of work in process and in progress rather than a kind of finished product or a set of reflections on what we've done. So this is sort of early stage stuff that you're getting. Okay, now if I can move my slides forward. Hooray. So just to say a little bit about who we are. We are quite a large consortium, 4 universities led by Joe Patterson at Cardiff University, but with University of Exeter, where I'm based, University of Bath, and University of Bristol as well. We also have a project that it's a research project that I'm talking about today, so a little bit different. I'm not coming from a practice perspective, but the project is very much rooted in and being done in partnership with both industry and local councils and third sector. So we've got SA Modular, Mikhail Richards from the design industries, Swansea Council and Bristol City Council from local government, wood knowledge wells, we can make an ASPB, which are all kind of more third sector community-based organisations rooted within the places that we're working. So that was just a little bit about who we are. Now on to why we're doing this research, why is it important? I won't spend a huge amount of time on this because I'm sure you're all familiar with the reasons for transition, but just to give a little bit of background to the project, really. We're focusing on housing, as the title suggests, transforming homes. The UK housing stock, as we know, is ageing. We have a huge number of houses that need to be transformed from their existing state to be fit for both sustainable futures, but also, to be inhabitable and to reflect modern living standards. We've got between 70 and 80% of homes in the UK still dependent on gas for their heating. And we also need our homes to be resilient to weather changes that are already kind of set in place, set in motion by climate change, including increases in heat, increases in stormier weather, and the expected increases in flood risk as well. As I've said, this is also a need to transform homes to meet wider kind of social issues that are linked to housing conditions such as health and well-being, quality of life, and poverty as well, including energy poverty. So while new build is obviously important, it's actually a relatively small part of the challenge for homes when we consider it in the context of the 28 million existing homes across the UK that we need to transform. And to successfully transform homes, we know that from past experience that the people living in those homes, in those places, have to be part of the process. This is true both of owner-occupied homes and of social housing. If designs are implemented or imposed without the engagement of those intended to be living in them, they're unlikely to succeed either in terms of the social or the environmental goals. And we just have to look at things like the performance gap in terms of kind of technical transformations without people engaged, or historic examples of design intent where we've kind of, perhaps demolished and rebuilt homes without involving people involved, and then the design intent, original design intents not being realised in those contexts. So we know that the importance of engaging people and involving people in the design process. So the project is being undertaken to kind of address all of these different challenges around why and how we need to transform our homes for the future. So where are we working? We are working with interwar council-built housing estates. So these were homes built between 1920 or 1919 and 1939, developed as part of the 1919 or out of the 1919 Housing and Town Planning Act, which committed to building homes that offered people secure, affordable, healthy, dignified homes. So there was this real idea, set of design ideas around this build of these homes. Was intended to provide decent housing for working people. These homes, when they were originally designed, used the kind of best building knowledge, the best materials of the time, and they were built to last. But with subsequent changes in housing policy, things like the right to buy, shift away from council provisioning of homes, and a lack of investment in the existing or remaining kind of social housing infrastructure, it's seen a kind of lack of modernisation, but also many of these homes, which are still in use today, being poorly insulated, being energy inefficient, not reflecting modern space standards, and still fueled by gas for heating. So there's an imperative, therefore, to transform these homes, which are still, very solid, very well-built homes, but just don't meet the kind of contemporary issues that we need to address. So there's a need to transform them, or imperative to transform them to meet the needs of future generations. So it's these types of housing estates that we're working in, of which there are millions of these types of homes across the UK in different cities and places. So sorry, I keep hitting my button instead of going forward. Just say a bit more about where we're working. We are working on two of these kind of housing estates, one in Bristol, Knoll West, and Town Hill in Swansea. These are both kind of large estates that were built in that interwar period with thousands of homes, and it's a mixture of socially owned and privately owned. So housing that has moved into private ownership through right to buy schemes over the years. And as part of our project, we have both social housing in the Swansea Town Hill case, and we have private residents in the Bristol case that we're working with to transform their homes. So working with the private residents is enabling us to do things that have been perhaps more difficult or not possible with council-owned properties. So it's great that we've got those two different kind of ownership models within our research. In addition to the in-depth work that we're undertaking with these demonstrator sites in Town Hill and Swansea, we are also undertaking engagement work to work with residents across other cities, including Manchester, Newcastle and Norwich, in estates with the same housing type, to bring in that kind of wider range of experiences, wider range of perspectives from both residents and stakeholders into our thinking about the designs that we're trying to produce for these homes. Takes me to my next slide, which is, what are we doing? We are undertaking a really wide range of activities that reflect coming together of design expertise, of technical expertise and social expertise, which is what I should have said at the beginning. I'm a social scientist. As Christine mentioned, I'm a human geographer. So I'm going to talk about some of the technical aspects today, but in the questions, my knowledge doesn't go very deep on those aspects. So I'm very much on the kind of social and the engagement side of things, just to preface what I'm about to say. So we're focusing on design-led work or design research that engages with heritage, engages with the original design intent, and kind of also engages with ideas that are at the cutting edge of design thinking, which I'll talk more about in a minute. We're developing designs that consider the wider environmental and health impacts of buildings. We're using bio-based and non-extractive materials. So for our external wall insulation, for example, we're using wood fibre and corkboard. Elsewhere, we're using timber in place of PVC, and we're working with organisations like Wood Knowledge Wales to ensure sustainable sourcing. For the project, we're both implementing and building understanding of how those materials perform and function as part of designs, how they can be effective for thermal efficiency, how they can be maintained well, and so on. But we're also building understanding of where the challenges lay for their implementation, which I'll talk more about in a minute. In addition to using bio-based materials, we're implementing technologies for deep whole house retrofits. So we're also changing the technologies the houses are dependent on, including removing gas altogether and installing heat pumps and other forms of renewable energy infrastructure. Installing solar PV, but also making use of systems like mechanical ventilation and heat recovery systems to really reduce the level of energy required to keep these homes warm. And finally, we're undertaking a process that is very much about kind of engagement and collaborative approaches with resident and community engagement, but also stakeholder engagement. So we've undertaken resident interviews, talking one-to-one with residents about their experiences of living in the homes and their experiences of being part of the wider communities to understand their challenges, their needs, their practices, how do those fit in with design expectations or not. We've undertaken stakeholder interviews, similarly talking one-to-one with professionals involved in the development and delivery of home transformation to build up that kind of bigger picture of different kinds of experiences, different kinds of challenges and different goals. We've undertaken design workshops, bringing together both residents and stakeholders in the demonstrator home sites and more widely across the UK in order to build understanding of the design process, of what our goals are as a project and how they might engage with that. And to bring and create dialogue between stakeholders and residents as well, so that we can help to really overcome some of the challenges that might, or conflicts that might otherwise emerge in these quite difficult processes sometimes of transformation. So that's what we've been doing. I hope I've covered everything there. Like I say, I'm a bit fuzzy today. So if I haven't covered things or you haven't got a clear sense of what we're doing, please do ask in the questions. I'll be able to answer more incisively, hopefully. The final thing actually that I should have mentioned is we're also focusing on skills development, both through developing and running training on things like working with bio-based materials as part of the project, and through supporting the development of local skills in the demonstrator sites that we're working on by bringing together teams that kind of live in those places to actually deliver the builds and the renovation works that we're undertaking. So I'll click on here. I wanted to talk a bit about the kinds of ideas that we're trying to apply and work with, the more academic, I guess, concepts that we're working with within the project, and aiming to apply in the context of existing buildings. I'm only going to very briefly outline these, but it's just to give a bit of context to what I'm about to talk about in terms of the challenges of, I guess, applying and working with these ideas in real world contexts. We were inspired by, or we've been working with, ideas of regenerative design, that notion of doing more than simply sustaining or simply doing less bad, but actually kind of trying to create designs that actively do good. So that in that we've been trying to kind of go beyond design in sort of interventions that go beyond thinking more technically just about energy retrofit, for example, which is quite often quite narrowly framed, to think about how we can implement transitions or transformations that lead to improvements in environment, but also to improvements in social aspects like community relations through the processes that we're implementing. In terms of, we've been working with or inspired by ideas of more than human and more than individual design. And in this, we're aiming to go beyond approaches that focus just on individual homes or individual people within those homes, to think more about transformation in ways that foreground more collective approaches that allow people to actually make connections between others in their community, and between people and nature as well, through home transformation. So we're trying to not only consider humans, but actually consider nature within the designs that we're creating. We're doing this partly through that use of bio-based materials, and that being a really core part of our project. It's thinking about and considering the wider impact of the materials that we're using to make buildings sustainable. But also by giving attention to the ways that nature and the non-human can be considered in design. So thinking about things like pets, if a cat flap is going to completely destroy the energy performance of your entire design, then that's a problem, given how most people live. So the final kind of set of ideas that we've been working with and thinking about is co-design and ideas of pluriversal design. So this is the idea that rather than designs being something that can be developed anywhere and applied universally, that they actually require context and they require that place-based specificity, and that brings forth pluralism in our design practices. And that requires obviously local engagement that affords connections between people. So these are the very, very briefly and very broadly the kinds of ideas or ideals that we've been working with or trying to work with. But what I want to talk about now is more the kind of nitty-gritty of actually delivering on those design ideas within sustainability in the context of working with existing homes rather than with new buildings, where this kind of thinking or these innovations might more often or typically be applied. So I'm going to talk about three different sort of areas. All of these are these three different areas of kind of where we've experienced challenges, but also where we found possibilities, I guess, for transformation. I think, as I've said, we're only 2 years in, so this is sort of very much kind of, we haven't resolved everything yet. This is very much, we're sort of in the middle of it. But we have been encountering these challenges and then sort of trying to find ways through them and past them, which I think is one of the important things that will come out of the project, understanding how we can overcome some of these challenges, and also understanding what the challenges are and where they exist for implementing some of the more innovative ideas that we might have for sustainable transformation. So all of these kind of ideas are I guess, have precedent within existing design and transformation, and they're very much possible, I think, but they're also really challenging to deliver on within existing institutional policy and political contexts. So I'm going to talk about these three challenges, which I've split out in terms of technical challenges, regulatory and institutional processes, and finally engagement. So in terms of technical challenges, one of the bigger things that we've encountered technically, and as I said, not a technical expert, so forgive me if I don't relay this correctly. Also, ask my colleagues to forgive me if I don't communicate it correctly. But one of the things we've encountered in terms of technical challenges has been the cavities and things like existing insulation within those cavities. In both case sites, there have been existing and past attempts at installing insulation. In the Bristol case site, the insulation has got wet, it's got damaged over time, and it's kind of fallen into different pockets of the cavity, creating problems with damp, problems with mold, and obviously not functioning as insulation is meant to in any way anymore. So that dealing with that means that we have to find ways to remove it, how to extract it. We've had similar problems with a different kind of insulation in the Swansea case site as well. And this has all taken, I guess, a lot of time. It's also taken money out of the budget that could have been, I guess, applied for other things that we were thinking about in terms of design. So these kind of technical issues around existing past practices with attempts at transformation, really, or attempts at transition, at least a sustainable transition, creating problems with, I guess, delivering on quality transformation processes. I think this is particularly salient in light of some of the recent controversies and problems that we've seen around things like Eco4 and the ways that innovation or technologies intended for sustainable transitions have been implemented poorly. And then they create these big problems in terms of technical challenges, but also in terms of social, I guess, with past experience of residents, of people with those technical changes in homes intended for sustainability not being done well. The picture and one of the pictures in the background here is of a different kind of insulation. So it's not related to insulation, but it's related to the installation of fire and carbon monoxide. And the resident wouldn't allow the council in this case back into the home to make other changes because they were really unhappy with the quality of the work that had been done with the first installation. So this connects not only to things that are done specifically for transition, for sustainability, but also to other forms of work that might be done within homes that then affects the willingness, I guess, of people to engage with or to consider future changes to their homes because things have been done poorly or incorrectly, or I guess without contemporary knowledge in their homes previously. So that was the first set of challenges, both technical and also the way that the technical bleeds into social challenges as well. The next thing I wanted to talk about were regulatory challenges. So within our project and within our designs, we'd imagined multiple different changes that we might be able to make and that we are embedding within our wider designs that go beyond the demonstrator homes. But within the demonstrator homes, there were multiple things that we kind of had to take off the table due to the interaction between the research and the kind of institutional or regulatory environment in terms of what people feel they can deliver in ways that also meet their goals. So for example, key things that we'd envisaged within our design were changes to the space of the properties. So either internal changes to the homes in terms of their configuration that might make them more energy efficient, but also bring them up to contemporary space standards. We'd also wanted to consider things that allowed for more personalisation and changes to interiors that aligned with contemporary living standards. So creating connection between kitchen and eating areas, for example. But partly because these types of changes were not necessarily compatible with the goals, the expectations of others, actually having to deliver transformation processes. we weren't able to make the kinds of space changes that we wanted to make within the designs as they're going forward at the moment. And this was partly related to issues of replicability. So people that we're working with, partners that we're working with, needed to maintain consistency and parity with previous projects, and also to maintain or maintain, I guess, perceptions of fairness, that all the changes that they were making as a council to all houses were being retrofitted or transformed to a similar standard using standardized approaches that could be trusted because they had been done before. So this is kind of about how, I guess, existing or wider processes can mitigate against making the kinds of changes that we were hoping to make, even through a research project where I guess we have much greater flexibility in what we could do in theory. It's not been possible for these kind of reasons of, I guess, standardization and replicability, which is what is needed within some of our partner organization. A second kind of regulatory challenge relates to bio-based materials. And here we've faced issues with meeting the standards that are required for materials within processes of transformation, particularly the PAS standard. A lot of the organisations that we're working with on bio-based materials are smaller organisations, so just the scale of the process that's required, even though there are kind of processes for innovating within these standards, the scale of it is quite difficult for smaller companies to meet that, just in terms of resource, skills, expertise to get through and manage to meet those standards. So it's not necessarily to do with the materials or the nature of the materials, but to do with the kind of regulatory process around meeting standards and meeting regulatory requirements that can create difficulties in working with certain bio-based materials and innovating in this way. So those are the set of kind of more sort of regulatory, but also institutional level challenges that we've faced in terms of implementing what we're trying to do and working with these sort of design ideals. Finally, I wanted to talk about engagement processes, which is where most of my work sits. In this, we've undertaken a huge amount of engagement work over the 2 years that we've been working on the project. We've been, as I've said, engaging with residents, engaging with stakeholders, doing one-to-one engagement, running workshops, really to make sure we're bringing people into the design process and creating designs that are more pluralistic and have those kinds of ideas of sort of collaborative and bringing people together in collective ways. And we've had lots of successes with our engagement processes. We've definitely generated kind of new community connections that weren't there before, which has been really productive, and new connections between residents and between councils and other stakeholders, for example, which have been really productive in moving forward and moving through potential areas of conflict. So just getting people together in rooms, talking to one another. Really important for dealing with a lot of the challenges that we've encountered. But we've also encountered challenges particularly with the long run nature of the processes that we've been undertaking. So as I've said, we're 2 years in and we started engaging with residents at the beginning of this 2 years. So just maintaining people's interest, people's willingness to give time, to input their sort of, time and resources themselves into this process over that amount of time. And then we've got another 2 years or another year before the demonstrators will be undertaken, has been a challenge just in terms of keeping people engaged with the process. So I'll just finish up because I realise I'm going to be slightly over time. So I wanted to say about the kind of positive things, or finish on the kind of positive things that have come out of our engagement processes beyond those challenges. And like I was just saying, some of the positive things have been around rebuilding trust between stakeholders and community, and developing those kinds of community connections that weren't there before. but also fostering resources between and within local neighbourhoods, giving people, I guess, the opportunity to work on the projects and to deliver some of the changes and the transitions that we're talking about has been really important for, I guess, using and drawing on the collective knowledge and resources that already exist within communities, and really trying to bring those to the fore through the project as well. So there have been really positive things that have come out of the engagement, as well as those challenges. Just to finish up, what's next? So just to give you an idea of our timeline for the project, the demonstrator projects will be completed, hopefully, fingers crossed, around the summer of 26, around sort of middle of next year. We're going to procurement end of this year and hoping to begin the build in spring. Yeah, so sort of late summer, hopefully, we'll be pretty much there. We're engaging with the residents throughout the process of those buildings and engaging with the wider kind of stakeholder networks around it. So interviewing people, those one-to-one chats and conversations throughout the process, both at the beginning, during and after. So that will help us to build insight both into the kind of technical performance of the buildings. We're also monitoring these buildings through various different techniques and technologies. We'll have a really good understanding of how the buildings are performing technically, but also how that connects to the resident experience and the stakeholder experience of delivering the transformations. We're engaging with residents in other parts of the country, undertaking community engagement with residents living in similar house types, but in different estates, really to build up and to build into our designs those wider considerations that go beyond the particular places that we're working with for the demonstrators. And engaging with stakeholders really crucially to try to translate what's coming out of the project in all its different forms into something that can be usable and useful to answer the questions that people working within this sector and within this area have. So that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you very much for listening. Apologies for me not being as sharp as I might normally be, but hopefully I've got through it and I've delivered something by way of insight into what we're doing in the project. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Catherine. You seem sharp to me. So there's already some questions here. So without further ado, I'm going to put those to you. So Marietta Gontikaki, who's a sustainability advisor, says, thank you, Catherine. Can you take us through some of the community engagement methods and practices you have employed and what you think was fundamental in maintaining the interest and equity of access to the process?
Yes, I mean, that's quite a big question because we've done loads of stuff, but I think equity, let's start with what we've done. We've done one-to-one interviews, which are, sitting with people in their homes, talking to them about their homes and really listening. I think that's a really fundamental thing. So our engagement hasn't just been about sort of going in and giving information and telling people about what we're doing and what we're planning. It's been very much about listening, and building our understanding from that process of listening to them, what their experiences are, what their goals are, what their expectations are. So that's key. That's one thing. And I think that's really important in terms of maintaining equity as well, that listening aspect to engagement.
And when you're going into that one-to-one conversation, are you saying, what is your energy efficiency like? Would you like some
No.
retrofit? Or are you saying like, tell me about
So
your life?
tell me about your home. And it'd be a qualitative, semi-structured interview, very open process. Happy to share the protocols actually that we use, by the way. That's something that we will package up as resources from the project that other people can use. But yeah, it's going in, sitting with people, having a cup of tea and sort of saying, yeah, tell me about how you live in your home. What do you love about your home? What's challenging about your home? Having a walk around with people, and some of the things that's revealed that we wouldn't have otherwise known about, that people were regularly cleaning mold. So you couldn't see the mold because they were cleaning it every week. So there were certain places in the house where you could have picked that up just through the technical monitoring, but other things that you wouldn't have picked up without talking to the resident and really understanding how they were living in the home and their kinds of experiences. And to get to that kind of stuff, you also need to have those initial conversations about about the home more generally, rather than going straight in with where are
You're
the
like, "Do you have
problems,
any
where are the
mold?"
challenges. Yeah, exactly.
So you would kind of be walking around with them, and then you might be, thinking, "Oh, you don't seem like you have any damp issues," and they're like, "Oh, maybe you
Yeah,
should
yeah,
see
yeah.
me. Yeah, you
Or
should see me
just
yesterday."
really openly, what are the issues where they, and they can say, "Oh, you spoke about this earlier. Is that in this room?" Or, so yeah, just keeping it really open, just pointing out things, picking out things that we can see and asking about them. Yeah,
And is that where the cat things like the cat flap might come up, where you're noticing
yeah,
that, that yeah.
yeah.
I really liked that anecdote about if a cat flap can't be installed, your design, there's something wrong with your design.
Yeah.
That's not you always the way we go at things. Sometimes we're like, you can no longer have, you can no longer live the way you live to have energy efficiency. The pattern book that you're creating, would you say that that's one of the things that's novel about it? Is that it's based on the way people actually live?
I hope so. Yeah, that's certainly the intention, and what we're trying to. As I've said, there are loads of challenges to actually doing this in practice that are, you know, those kind of institutional legacies and ways of doing that are quite hard to break through. But certainly, yes, that's what we're aiming to do, to really not treat residents as kind of aberrations that sort of mess up the design and therefore they're the problem in terms of the performance, but actually as something you need to integrate and take account of when you're designing. And actually, I think a big part of that is not just sort of accepting, oh, people live how they live, and you need to try and find a way to design around that, because sometimes it's just not going to work for sustainability, like you say. But actually enrolling people in the process so that they understand that their responsibilities, but also their kind of power around the process of sustainable design. So if they're really enrolled and engaged in it, like our residents will be and are being, that they really understand how they need to live in their home in order for it to perform effectively, and they're not sort of being asked to do that at the end or being told how to live, but they've kind of been involved in that whole process of developing it, so they understand it in a deeper way.
So you have that one-to-one interview. What were some of the
Yeah.
other,
So
methods that
the
you
other, I
used?
guess, the bigger things really are the workshops, the collaborative workshops. There are also bigger community events as well that our community partners We Can Make have held, and really they have spearheaded the engagement and led all of the engagement in the Bristol case site, as one of our partner organisations, and that's been about engaging with people regularly, not just through about and around the project, which has been obviously really important and central, but also through running wider community events, things around other aspects that the community are interested in developing and building up. I think that's been really important to, in terms of that question of sustaining engagement, actually running things that have come out of the community themselves and out of the workshops potentially that are related, but tangential perhaps to the project core focus. um, and I think that has also delivered on that kind of ambition of creating community connections, of actually making positive changes in places that go beyond just thinking about kind of more technical infrastructural changes.
When, we talk about maintaining the equity of access to the process, does that help with that too? When you have different methods of engagement, you get different kinds of people engaging, or is kind of the equity delivered in a different way?
Yeah, we've taken a street by street approach. So in the demonstrator sites, it's everybody on the street has been invited to be engaged, whether or not they're going to have their house transformed through the process. They've been involved in the process from the beginning, and then it's moved towards a kind of collective decision making about which houses, both practically, but also in terms of willingness, will actually undergo the transformation process. Or I'm banned from saying retrofit because it's so narrow.
And it's completely,
Trying to-
said here all the time. So can you talk about being banned from saying retrofit?
Yeah. So it's just as part of the project, because retrofit is quite a narrowly conceived term. It's also something that doesn't have a lot of meaning outside of the circles that I
This
had.
event,
Yeah.
yeah. Which is
And
important, I think, for people to know. So, because
yeah,
I think we had this whole conversation, I was like, "Oh, we could just call it retrofit," and you're like, "No, we'll call it transforming homes." And I was
yeah, yeah,
and so, yeah,
exactly.
so what is it that happens if we, if we walk in and we say, "Oh, it's a street by street retrofit project," what happens with that word? It has no meaning to
Yeah, I
people?
don't think it has a lot of it doesn't have a lot of salience in the wider public, but also I think it is quite it has meaning here, and it is useful, I think, in terms of describing what we're trying to do, that it is about existing buildings and changing. But I think transformation is that much broader term that allows you to, it is much more encompassing, and it moves us beyond. Also, I think retrofit has become quite closely allied with with energy technologies, basically. So doing kind of energy retrofits to the home. So it doesn't necessarily encompass other thinking either about kind of materials and the kinds of materials that we might be using, but also about those more social, wider community aspects of transformation that we might be considering.
And when you're speaking to people, is it mainly around that, is energy efficiency not the only reason why they're doing this? That, it might also be related to climate change. Does climate anxiety come up in these conversations at all? Because you start with the home, and maybe, issues around the home, whether that's damp, or draftiness. But where does climate anxiety fit into this?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't necessarily encountered climate anxiety in our conversations with people, but it is something that we've foregrounded in those conversations as part of goals and the reasons for the project, and it's something that people
Mhm.
respond really positively to. Feeling that you can be part of something that is a bigger, I guess, set of transit, that you're doing something really positive for both people and planet, I guess, in engaging with these processes of transformation. It's a really,
Mm.
it's like a nice thing. It's a positive thing, and it's something that, yeah, people are really happy to be part of and to be engaged with. And the idea, I didn't show any of the quotes today, but some of the quotes at the engagement process were just even presenting this idea that you don't have to have gas heating, that you can have something else that is better for the planet. Was for some people that, oh, I just never even considered I had an option, that I could do something that was different. So I think in some ways, I think a lot of the things that we probably take for granted in this group, or in this setting, are not necessarily as well known about as we might like to think. And
Mhm.
I think that's been, so I think foregrounding all of that within the project and talking to people about it has been really positive and important. And I think it's it's not something we should shy away from. I think sometimes there's a tendency to think, oh, that's not going to connect with where people are in their particular place, that is too abstract. But actually, I think in our experience, it's been a really, really positive framing for what we're trying to do.
Really interesting, because I mean, we're maybe thinking retrofit is the positive connecting word, and in fact, it might be more about belonging to a kind of collective action or collective, positive change. So I've got two questions here that are kind of related. I'll put them to you together. Amy Collins, Senior Infrastructure Planner for TCBGCs, wants to know who funds the retrofit changes to the homes. And Louisa Boyles, partner of head of sustainability at Hawkins Brown, wants to know whether there is research into a longer term funding model for that community retrofit if scaled up.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
who's
So
funding this and who might
yeah,
fund in the future and who's
I
going to
can.
fund in these other cities?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I can answer the first question really easily. It's the Arts and Humanities Research Council that are funders. So that's straightforward, I think. But if you
And
want,
they will fund the works as well,
yeah, they
the
fund they
works
fund the
pieces
whole
as well.
project, including the demonstrator projects. Yeah. Oh, so that was all part of our original proposals, for the grant, that we would do these we would demonstrate the designs in real world context, and deliver learning out of that. So it's very much about learning by doing, within this project. So we're not obviously just delivering the retrofits. We're also, like I said, monitoring it in multiple different ways in terms of the technical performance of the things that we're doing, but also we're doing that kind of one-to-one engagement work and collective engagement work throughout the process to understand also how those technical performance data and information is interacting with the social, and how I guess the engagement processes ultimately can lead to positive outcomes or not, as we'll see what the research yields in terms of that as well. And then it's
And you're
also about,
training people as well, training and skills.
yeah, so the
Yeah.
two other threads are around better understanding of and feeding into consideration of how we can change, I guess, regulatory institutional processes in order to allow transformations to go through. And then the final thread is around skills and training. So we're providing skills and training for wider people working in the sector, coming out of the project, for example, working with bio-based materials, working with modular approaches to builds, but also we are providing training, I guess, through the demonstrator sites within the people that are working on and delivering the demonstrator homes in terms of upskilling local skills and practices. And we're trying to work with local companies in order to provide the materials and yeah, so sort of feeding into local economies as well through what we're doing. And again, the point of doing that is not just to do it, but to learn through doing it. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges? How can we overcome them? And then
A longer term
the
or
second thing
funding
was about
model.
scaling, I think.
Yeah.
So I think the scaling question is a really interesting one. It's one we get asked every time I do a presentation on the project. How do we scale this up? How do we make it bigger? And I think to that, I think there are some really interesting ideas around kind of form and function when we're looking at specific places. And that's about understanding what are the functions of what we're doing in terms of what are the general thing that we're trying to achieve or that we are achieving through what we're doing. And then that can take multiple different forms in multiple different places. So by learning through the project what those kind of more general things are that we're achieving or that we're able to do or that we are desirable to do, that will give us a kind of set of principles that can then be taken on in different places in different forms in ways that are actually applicable to or suit that particular place. So I think for me, it's about thinking about scaling differently. I think scaling is often thought about in terms of it has to be exactly the same every time you do it, and that you create something that is scalable in a way that is the same or replicable. But I think this is much more about kind of transferability and creating understanding of, what is the kind of, what are the general functions that we're undertaking in these places that could be undertaken in different forms.
But then
So that's
also,
my
like you
answer to the
said,
question
that
about
methodology.
scaling.
Yeah.
And I guess that
Yeah.
relates also to funding. It's like, how do you fund these things? And I think it, again, will be different in different places depending on the particular context. So if you're working with a local council, for example, they might have funding available. So coming out of the project will be designs that would be applicable and usable by local authorities and local councils and processes as well. But also we want to have sort of processes and understanding of funding approaches for privately owned as well.
Do you think that community engagement that you've done across the cities, when that is made available, you talked about, even sharing some of the structured questions, etc.
Yeah.
Do you think that that will show a kind of something that, is, can we make generalizations on the basis of that information, or do we just need to be doing these one-to-one open-ended interviews and taking that deep community engagement approach because we are going into people's homes, and that's just fundamentally important to involve them?
Again, I think on one level, the form that we've taken is one-to-one interviews, but the general function is listening. So you could do that in multiple different ways. You don't have to you haven't got the time, the resource, or potentially the expertise to go into homes and do one-to-one interviews and tour around people's homes with them, or maybe you do. But I think the important sort of overarching thing is that there is space brought in to listen to the experiences of people within their homes and within their communities, so that you have that understanding built into what you're doing. That it's not just about organising events where you're delivering information, that it's about organising forms of engagement that allow the time and the space for you to listen. And I think that's crucial for multiple things, not just learning about the homes, but also about overcoming potential conflict and obstacles as you move through processes. I think too often we're worried about engagement because it might throw things up that we don't. But actually, I think engaging early, listening to people, enrolling them in the process, that's how you overcome those obstacles. If you sort of put engagement off till you're way down the line, that's when you encounter real conflict, I think, and real challenges, because people feel like there's a lot that's happened that they haven't been enrolled in. So it can potentially create more conflict.
Well, Catherine, that just leaves me to thank you for being here. Really great to have you share that research with us.
Thanks very much, and apologies again for not being quite as sharp as I might normally be. But yeah, hopefully you've got some sense of the project and what we're trying to do.
Absolutely, super interesting. And that brings this session to a close. But if you found that interesting, you'll love our next session. We will be back on the hour in 6 minutes' time with Decarbonizing the Crown Estate with Lame Vert, Sustainability Director of Net Zero for the Crown Estate. And I will see you then.